we doing, folks? Your host Moose here on the Pitt Panthers Football Network as we welcome you to our Season 6 Conference Championship Week recap and essentially college football playoff selection discussion show where we go over what happened in Conference Championship Week and what potentially could be to come as we look towards the college football playoff. In the Conference USA, Marshall comes out with the 34-31, a tight victory over Louisiana Tech. In the Mountain West, Utah State 30-27 over Fresno State, a couple of fantastically close conference championship games. And if you look around Conference Championship Week, what a dramatic week for the viewers. I mean, every game almost came down to the wire. USC 35-32 over Washington, a final minute or almost final minute touchdown. The teams went back and forth the entire game. Look at the scoring, just Washington, USC, Washington, USC. Eventually, Taylor Coleman helped lead the Trojans over the Washington Huskies in an improbable almost victory. 3 touchdown passing for Coleman, touchdown rushing as well. Casey Pearson had a great game for Washington passing the football. Isaiah Russell running the ball had a nice game, caught a touchdown pass as well. A couple of Heisman finalists right there between Coleman and Russell. An incredible game, but the Trojans come out on top. In the Big 12, as expected, Oklahoma wins, but it was much closer than anticipated. Baylor battled back in this one, 22 fourth quarter points, but it really came down to Taylor Savage. 5 touchdowns for the sophomore quarterback for the Sooners, led them to an incredible victory and a 13-0 record. Harper had a great game for Baylor, ran for a touchdown, passed well. I mean, he pretty much did it all for the Bears to keep them in it, but Taylor Savage, 342 yards passing, 5 touchdowns, an incredible day for the sophomore, and one that puts everyone on notice that he could lead the Sooners to a national championship this year and potentially a Heisman in the future. An incredible year for him. Over in the Big Ten championship game, Ohio State 37, Nebraska 27. Nebraska again, 21 points in the fourth quarter to keep things close. Ohio State went out to an early lead that gave them the victory, and they end up with a 37-27 victory. Brian Barbour, their senior quarterback, came in and started 3 for 7 for 33 yards. He struggled, so Ohio State pulled him, put D.D. Harris back at the helm, and he had an incredible day. Ran for 42 yards, passed well. Michael Lowry ran for 117 yards and a 75-yard touchdown run. A great game there for the Buckeyes. Kelly led the way with 158 yards and 2 touchdowns. Really, really solid game. Matt Parker for Nebraska, 3 touchdowns, a ton of passing yards. He had a couple of receivers go over 100 yards. Rhodes with 3 touchdowns, but not enough for the Cornhuskers, and Ohio State wins the Big Ten. They're back to winning ways after a down year last season. In the ACC, Clemson and UNC. Again, what a day. Will Alford gives Clemson the go-ahead touchdown and 2-point conversion. They were down by a point, 42-41. They score the winning touchdown with 2 minutes to play in the fourth quarter. Great game there for the Clemson quarterback. He went toe-to-toe with Zach Anderson, the senior from UNC, against the sophomore Will Alford for Clemson. 367 passing yards for Clemson, 424 for UNC. Look at the total offense between these two schools. 1,300 yards of total offense almost. Incredible game between the two teams. Clemson with almost 600, UNC with almost 700 yards of offense. Anderson passed for 424. He ran for 112 and a touchdown. Sam O'Donnell had a touchdown as well and 100 yards. Look at the day that UNC had moving the football. Absolutely incredible. And Alford, 367 yards, 4 touchdowns. So much composure for, I believe he's a redshirt sophomore quarterback, leading the Tigers. Incredible day for him. Anthony Riggs, their senior running back, 156 yards on 11 carries and a touchdown as well. Ian Evans, 2 touchdowns. James Phillips had 152 yards, 7 receptions. Adam Chandler, former guy we tried to sign at Pitt, 5 catches as well for Clemson in that victory that almost assuredly gives them a college football playoff berth. Another incredible game. Mississippi, Ole Miss against Florida, 42-32, 28 points in the fourth quarter for Ole Miss. Dustin Young absolutely went off in this game, rushing touchdown and 2 passing touchdowns in the fourth quarter. And then as they're trying to put the game away, Dustin Leonard ends up with a 44-yard touchdown run as well as they're trying to ice the football game. Clint Franklin basically did it all for Florida. He was their entire offense, essentially. 191 yards for Florida rushing, 260 passing, and a lot of that came from Franklin. Ole Miss with 600 total yards of offense, 343 passing, and 3 touchdowns for Dustin Young. No interceptions, almost a perfect game for him. And if you take a look at the rushing stats as well, 122 yards and 2 touchdowns, a 5-touchdown, 450-plus yard performance for Dustin Young that may have been his Heisman moment. Bowie, 120 yards and 2 touchdowns receiving. Leonard with a touchdown as well and 7 catches from his halfback position because Pravon Dean, their number one halfback, was out, or number one wide receiver, was out. So Bowie, the tight end, best tight end probably in college football, steps up and has an incredible game. For Florida in the loss, Clint Franklin, 260 passing, 2 touchdowns. He ran for 91 yards and a touchdown as well. I mean, this was a day that Clint Franklin and Dustin Young were probably your 2 Heisman favorites coming into the season. Clint Franklin did all he could to try and lead Florida to an SEC championship victory. Ole Miss as a team was just a stroke better. Dustin Young just a bit better, and he edges Franklin in the showdown there. Malik Marshall with a good game for Florida, receiving as well. And then the final conference championship game, Ohio 41-27 over Central Michigan. The Bobcats again winning the MAC behind their strong rushing attack. Jeremy Butler and Garcia both going over 100 yards in this game. I mean, what? Did he even need to pass the football? Although, interestingly enough, CMU only passed for 70 yards in this game, which is pretty incredible. Ohio's defense was really impressive. But when you can run the football like these Bobcats can, look at that, 153 yards, 100 yards, 4 touchdowns between their top 2 backs, 45 carries between the 2 of them. An incredible day for Ohio and another MAC championship for the Bobcats. So an incredible conference championship week. So much drama in pretty much every game almost. I think there's only 2 or 3 games that maybe didn't come down to one possession. Dustin Young ends up winning NCAA Player of the Week for conference championship week with his incredible performance. Travis Campbell in the loss for Louisiana Tech against Marshall in the Conference USA Championship. 3 interceptions for the redshirt sophomore. Great game for him despite the losing effort. So an impressive performance there. But everybody's eyes were on Dustin Young in the SEC Championship, and who knows where it might lead him elsewhere. But an incredible game overall for the quarterback. And in the ACC, Zach Anderson with an incredible performance, the Michigan transfer, putting on maybe the best performance we saw in Conference Championship week despite the loss. 424 passing, 112 rushing, 5 total touchdowns. William Walker with a pick in the victory for Clemson, but Anderson was the star of the show. An incredible quarterback duel between the senior and the sophomore signal caller for Clemson in Will Alford. D.D. Harris, Big Ten player of the game, 350 yards passing, 42 rushing, 3 touchdowns as he came in essentially in relief and put on a great show. And then senior free safety A.J. Hampton forced and recovered a fumble to win Defensive Player of the Game honors. Oklahoma, what a day for Taylor Savage, the true sophomore, number 1 recruit from a season ago, earned the starting job this year, forced Al Dingle, last year's starting quarterback, to transfer on the back of his bowl performance last season. Savage, he's come in and played like an absolute savage. 5 touchdown performance in the victory there. Conference USA, of course, Travis Campbell, we know about what he did. Benny Washington, the Marshall senior running back. We've seen him before. He took on the Panthers, of course, previously. Almost a 200-yard performance for him in the victory to win Player of the Game honors. Maction, of course, Jeremy Butler, 153 yards, 2 touchdowns. Mike Reed with a sack and a couple tackles for loss for the Bobcats in their victory over Central Michigan. But Butler, what a season he's had, running for almost 2,000 yards, I believe, at this point. Perry Smith in the Mountain West Conference, a couple of touchdowns for Utah State in their victory over Fresno State, while Ryan Holman, the senior outside linebacker, forced a fumble and recovered a fumble and had 6 total tackles in the victory for Utah State. Pac-12, Taylor Coleman, the man to know about. 242 yards passing, 105 rushing, 4 total touchdowns in USC's surprising victory over number 4 Washington that really throws a muddle in the college football playoff picture as we take a look at things here very shortly. Ron Galloway with a pick in that victory as well. Marcus Jackson, the man to talk about defensively for Ole Miss, couple of sacks, 9 tackles in the victory over Florida. But Dustin Young, we know, is the main man from this particular matchup. And with his incredible display, he ends up earning the Heisman in a pretty close vote. Taylor Coleman, of course, had the huge game for USC in the conference championship week as well, propelled both of them above Taylor Huff, who going into conference championship week was number 1 on the Heisman watch. Of course, Virginia Tech did not make conference championship week, did not make the ACC conference championship game. Huff didn't get that final opportunity to showcase his skills, and because of that, Dustin Young puts on a show and ends up winning the 2021 Heisman Trophy. 48 total touchdown season for Young, almost 700 yards rushing, 3,500 yards passing, and of course an incredible season for Ole Miss where they go 12-1 and likely earn a berth in the college football playoff. Taylor Coleman did so much for USC. Incredible year for him. He did have a great transfer receiver in Jared DeLuca, who came over from Rutgers, transferred to USC this season, and put up an incredible year. I think he's one of the favorites for the Biletnikoff Award, but a great year, had a great player at his disposal, but still had to run the show himself. So Coleman finishes second in Heisman voting, Travis Huff third, Isaiah Russell fourth after a good game in the losing effort for Washington against USC, 140 yards in that, or 130 yards, a touchdown in that one for him. And Taylor Savage jumps into the Heisman race, ends up finishing fifth in the voting on the back of his incredible performance against Baylor. 5 touchdowns, of course, as we remember. Dustin Young, 36 touchdowns, 4 interceptions. What a year for him. His rushing numbers actually went down a little bit this year, 54 yards a game and 12 touchdowns against 58 yards and 13 touchdowns last season, but the passing numbers is where he really shined. 270 yards passing, 36 per game, 36 touchdowns, only 4 picks. Coleman was actually a shade better, 40 touchdowns, 4 interceptions, 286 yards a game passing, but his rushing numbers, he didn't have the touchdowns. His rushing yardage was about the same, and I think really it comes down to the team success end up playing into it a little bit, because if you go purely on numbers, other than rushing touchdowns, Coleman had better stats, but Young ended up doing it for a little bit better team. Huff, you could even argue, was just as good, if not better as well. 36 touchdowns, 3 interceptions, and if you look at his hardware list up there, he won all of the other awards that Dustin Young did not win. He wins the Maxwell, the Walter Camp, the Davey O'Brien Award, 10 touchdowns rushing. He had almost 70 yards a game, so a little bit more prolific rushing the football, a little bit less prolific passing, but his touchdown to interception ratio just as good as Dustin Young's, if not a little bit better. Isaiah Russell, great season for a very good Washington team. 19 touchdowns is probably the big key that got him into here. 19 rushing touchdowns, 3 receiving as well, so he wasn't a slouch receiving the ball, but a great runner for Washington. And Taylor Savage, the true sophomore, probably the favorite in the clubhouse for the Heisman Trophy next season, 39 touchdowns against 7 interceptions. 3,200 passing yards to 250 a game for Oklahoma. An incredible season for the true sophomore, who, of course, like I mentioned, #1 recruit coming out of high school a year ago, ended up serving as the backup, took over in their bowl game last season and led them to an incredible performance in the second half. Earned the starting nod. Al Dingle transferred to Oregon, had a tough season there, and Savage has shined for the Sooners, but this day belongs to Dustin Young, the Heisman winner. Now, the real question then becomes, when you take a look at the results of Conference Championship Week, who has earned a berth in the college football playoff? Oklahoma surely is in at 13-0 and a Big 12 championship. The big question mark you'd have to say comes down to Cincinnati versus everyone else. Because when you look at the coaches poll, you can see some movement. Florida drops down to number 12 with their loss. Washington's down to number 8 with their loss to USC, who comes up to number 6. North Carolina falls back to number 16 with their loss, of course, to Clemson. I think that's a little harsh on them, especially because they kept it to a 1-touchdown game. Ohio State jumps up a little bit in the rankings. Baylor falls out of the rankings despite losing just by a touchdown to Oklahoma. So you never understand what the pollsters are doing here, which is why we take it into our own hands. We take it into the College Football Playoff Selection Committee's hands to determine who's going to be in the playoff. And we look at the BCS rankings, Oklahoma, pretty much definitively your #1 seed. You'd have to argue, you think 12-1 ACC champion Clemson in the playoff. Now the question is, are they the 2? Are they the 3? I think Ole Miss is more than likely the 2 seed. Their victory over Florida, they only have a 1-point loss to Arkansas on their resume, versus Clemson has a 20-point loss to Virginia Tech on their resume. So I think you'd have to say Oklahoma, Ole Miss, probably Clemson at 12-1 at that point. But then the question becomes, who gets that 4th seed? You probably have 4 teams who you can maybe make an argument for. One of them has the weakest argument, and that's Ohio State. Other than the fact that they won a Power 5 conference and are 11-2, you could argue potentially Ohio State, but the other 3 teams have stronger cases, you'd have to say, than the Buckeyes. The reason being, one of those other 3 teams is Cincinnati, who the Buckeyes played earlier in the season, the first week of the season, and lost by 6 points to. At home as well. They also have a really tough loss to Maryland on the schedule. A decent Maryland team, 6-6 bowl eligible, but 41-14 at home at the Shoe to Maryland is certainly not good to have on the resume. Ohio State finished very strong, wins over ranked Michigan, Nebraska, You look at their schedule, they actually have 1 ranked win. They did beat Penn State, who was ranked at the time. So it's a tough resume for Ohio State, but we at least throw them in the conversation. Washington, with their loss to USC, probably knocks them out, because USC would be the team to discuss resume-wise. Taylor Coleman, of course, their leader, passing 40 touchdowns, 4 INTs. There's DeLuca, like I mentioned, 93 receptions, 1,300 yards, 15 touchdowns. Incredible season for him after transferring over from Rutgers. What a grad transfer that turned out to be. Now with USC, they're interesting here. Their 2 losses, one of them was to Washington, a 3-point loss in overtime. They overturned that in the Pac-12 championship game by beating Washington 35-32 on a neutral field. They then lost in their season opener to a very good Texas team, top 10 ranked, 10-2. They lost 42-23 to Texas away from home in their opening game of the season. They've also finished the season with 4 straight ranked wins. They beat Stanford, UCLA, Notre Dame, and Washington. Granted, all in pretty close affairs, but they've won all of those games to go to 11-2. So they have a lot of ranked wins, but of course they do have 2 losses on their record books. Virginia Tech is the real question mark here. The Hokies, 11-1, led by Travis Huff, who's been incredible. They have 3 really good runners in Huff, BJ Manning, and Eddie Henderson, who ran for 1,000+ last year, missed some time with injury this year. Really good receiving core in Ryan Winston. And when you look at Virginia Tech, they have dominated teams. They beat number 3 Clemson away from home by 20. They beat number 25 Miami. They beat number 10 Pitt at home. Lost to number 16 UNC at home, but only by 4 points. They beat a number 21 ranked Georgia team by 20+ points. And they haven't had too many close games otherwise. Georgia Tech was a close one. Virginia was a close one, but that's a rivalry affair. So when you look at Virginia Tech's resume, it is fantastic. Virginia Tech's been very impressive, and more than likely the team you're comparing them to is number 2 Cincinnati, led by another grad transfer. Steve Williams transferred from Syracuse this year to take over at quarterback for PJ Fleck in Cincinnati. 25 TDs, 6 INTs. Cantrell running the ball has been incredible. 1,147 yards, 16 touchdowns, 11 touchdowns for Wolf, their leading receiver, and they're unbeaten. The only problem with Cincinnati is their resume. At number 11, Ohio State, they did get a 6-point victory. They've blown out a lot of teams, especially lately. USF was ranked, of course, last week. They beat them by 37 points. They beat UCF, a good team, by almost 40 points. But they've had some close affairs. They beat a very good Tulane team by 41 points. But then Temple, they only beat by 5. ECU, a 2-win team, they only beat by 3 in overtime. And Virginia Tech played ECU and smoked them. So you have comparable opponents there in ECU. Virginia Tech beat them better. But Virginia Tech lost a game. Should they be penalized for the fact that they lost a game and Cincinnati hasn't, when they have arguably the better resume? That's what it's really going to all come down to. We've had similar scenarios to this in the past. Remember UAB making the college football playoff and putting up a good fight, but losing by 24 to national champions LSU back in 2019. You can take a look here at the offenses and defenses like I showed you. Again, when we compare Virginia Tech, number 5 scoring offense in the country, number 5 defense. Cincinnati, number 3 scoring offense in the country, number 2 defense. But then the quality of competition comes into play. So I'm going to leave it in the comments for you. There's going to be a link for a poll. 4 teams. We'll leave Ohio State on the poll. Ohio State, USC, Cincinnati, Virginia Tech. Who deserves the 4th seed in the college football playoff? And also in the comments, if you want, leave your top 4. Oklahoma likely 1, but then 2 and 3. Is it Clemson? Is it Ole Miss? Who's your 2? Who's your 3? And who's your number 4? Leave those in the comments for me, your top 4, as well as vote in the poll for who should get the number 4 seed. As always, I love getting the committee's input on this to help decide who should be in the college football playoff. So as always, guys, thank you so much for watching. Hail to Pitt. We'll see you soon. Take care. Bye-bye.